So I often say that this show or the Maverick community, as I just said to my guest before we went on, is about asking, challenging or powerful questions about the status quo of what we're doing. And AI is taking up a lot of our time and headspace. Lots of people talk about it. And especially in a hospitality context, I think it's such an enabler, as Ben from Sona talks about today, as well as our guest. So we're going to explore the current state of AI when it comes to hospitality. Also, how exactly this becomes an enabler for you as an operator, and how can you actually use it as where we are now as a practical tool to make your organization more powerful so you actually can spend time on what's really matter is the hospitality experience of your business. Welcome to the show, Ben. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Super excited to be here. Really exciting topic. So looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, and we have lots of questions we could explore. And as I said to you, like when I started, this was like a candy shop, so we might not capture all the questions today, but we're definitely going to go into some of the meaty bit. But what I thought would be really interesting, Ben, for the audience is also you could maybe talk a bit about, your journey, how you co-founded Sona, and why you are focusing on the hospitality industry for solving problems there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've spent my background is I'm an engineer originally, but I've spent about the last 15 years building technology companies. And the last 10 of that has been in technology focused on frontline workforces. And so prior to co-founding Sona, we had a gig economy platform where we provided workers for retail and hospitality companies. Generally, if they needed help with peak demand and this sort of thing. So if you needed 2 or 3 bartenders, for example. So we had this workforce of thousands of people across the UK and in Germany, and we built all the tech to manage those thousands and thousands of people. So everything from applicant tracking to scheduling to all of those things that you build, the whole end-to-end thing. And that was just what we did as a technology company. And increasingly, our customers, who were big hospitality and retail operators, were coming to us and saying, "Hey, that app that all of your guys use to manage their work, what is that? Can we have access to that? Can we use it?" And we said, "Oh, no, it's not really what it's for. It was designed for running our business, but can you show us what it is that you're running to manage your workforces?" And they'd show us this a lot of tech that was 10, 20, 30 years old that was really good at the time, but really wasn't meeting their needs. And we had more and more of those conversations where they were saying, "Look, we really need something different because our needs have just changed over the last 10 or 15 years. And eventually the message from the market got so strong that someone needed to go and build a modern stack for managing the complexities of a big frontline workforce in hospitality. And we were fortunate enough to find some very, very supportive investors who agreed that technology needed to be built, who appreciated that the thing that you'd be building is very different to anything that had been built before. So it would require a really big R&D investment up front to make it work. And 3 or 4 years ago now, we were fortunate enough to find people who wanted to support that journey. And so Sona was born out of that. And I think that experience of, all these thousands of people worked for us. We were responsible for making sure they had a good work experience, the way they worked made sense. We were responsible for making sure they got paid perfectly for everything. And that's very much in our DNA that we started from the perspective of what it's like to manage an awful lot of people. And we hope we've carried that through into all the software that we've built at Sona.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting when you talk about technology in general to the front line. When you haven't been managing it, it's very hard to get that right because, again, you say the complexity of running frontline staff and hospitality businesses often have one and maybe multiple business models, how they deliver. They might do events, they might have a hotel, pubs, whatever they operate. And sometimes they can be really, really difficult business models to get your scheduling systems or any kind of operating system fitting with.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think there have been some really interesting businesses, but they were businesses that ended up being engineers and tech folks building software for how they imagine a hospitality business might operate. And it just doesn't work. Even though we've had a big workforce, we end up spending huge amounts of time with, even within a subsegment, like luxury hotels versus mid-price hotels versus budget hotels, they operate very differently. Very different things matter to them. And so I think that bit of trying to understand like what are the bottom up things that actually matter to making these businesses successful. That's really, really hard to get right. It's really good fun in hospitality because there's a lot of very interesting characters doing things quite differently.
What is the big problem you would say from a co-founder's perspective you're solving in hospitality with Sona?
I think sort of, I'm sure I know it's very well covered territory on this show that sort of the operating environment is difficult, right? Like costs are going up, wage bills are going up, competition is up. It is a difficult environment. And I think there's sort of a shared acceptance that we can't cost cut the way out of that. Like most businesses have cost cut as far as they can really. So the only way to be successful in this climate is to trade out of the current place. It is to drive sales. It is to grow in most places. And Sona, for most businesses, that people piece, having the exact right people that you retain in the right place at the right time, will be the difference between profitability and not in the end. Like that wage cost line is just getting bigger and bigger. And so we provide the sort of the operating system to intelligently make sure that you have your workforce deployed in a way that yes is efficient and yes manages costs, but more importantly drives sales and drives revenue. And the tooling for sort of the management of of these operators to define the behaviors they want to see across their estate in a way that will allow them to drive consistent decision making, while still allowing each of the individual operators to take into account the nuances that make up their individual locations. And I think that's the crux of the challenge that's been very hard in the past.
And is there any case studies you could share with the audience of how you have actually, deployed Sona into these businesses and how that has maybe changed the way they maybe think or operate as a business, or they can operate with more ease maybe?
Yeah, I think it's sort of you often get multiple phases of sort of the impact being felt. I think the first wave is generally visibility, that when you have a system that can accurately model the difference between your locations. So, if you take a hotel example, different departments are run completely differently. If you look at how sort of the front desk is run versus the kitchens are run versus housekeeping, a system that can finally model those different operating processes and then report on them in one place, suddenly you find out an awful lot of things about your business that you didn't know. So you find out that when certain people are in charge, these things happen. When other people are in charge, actually the business is run quite differently. And so you start to have the tools to say, hey, why is that? Like, which of these are actually more beneficial? Which is driving more bottom line, or which is driving a better guest experience? Whatever might be important. And then I think the next wave of that is then giving people tools that for them make their lives easier. So a good example is something like automatic scheduling. The word automatic is terrible. I feel like even we should use it less. What something like automatic scheduling does is allow you to say, these are the parameters that matter to the business. Like, this is how we want you to balance guest experience versus cost versus taking a chance on driving slightly higher sales. But then to model from the bottom up, this is what makes this location unique. The fact that it's in a CBD, or the fact that it's near a cinema, or the fact that it's near a sports ground, whatever that might be, and combine that top-down guidance with that bottom-up, this is what makes it unique, to generate what is a perfect suggested is very important there, suggested schedule for an operator. And a stat that we talk about a lot is there's something like 10 for every week. If you've got 30 people working in a department, there are about 10 million valid rosters you can make for that. I don't know what everyone else's maths is like, but I definitely can't evaluate 10 million combinations side by side and make a decision. And so you get to give somebody the optimal suggestion for what they can do, so they can spend 15 minutes reviewing that and improving it rather than 5 hours. And so they get to spend the other 4 hours and 45 minutes back on the floor with their staff, driving team capability. And I think that sort of that double-sided thing of getting much better visibility of what's happening, being able to drive changes and behaviors, but then also freeing up people to go and do the things that you wanted them to be doing for the first time. Because I don't think in an ideal world, if you said to somebody, hey, what do you want your GM to be doing? I don't think that would be sitting in the back room getting cross with the computer. It would be being on the floor, going and seeing how people interact with guests, going and seeing where there are opportunities to drive capability. And so it frees them up to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's like, and often, managers end up getting stuck by the table because they have to do something that could be, the word automized is the wrong word again, but like that could be taken care of in less time if you use the right tools. And actually, if you put in the right input, which I've learned over experience, like technology is worth nothing if it doesn't have the right data from the outset to operate on. We said in the beginning we're going to be talking a bit about AI. And I thought, Ben, instead of just jumping in and talking about the benefits and the challenge around AI in hospitality, I think it's really good to start a part of AI talk about what is your thoughts around the definition of AI. How do you actually understand AI, and how do you actually you should think about AI in a hospitality context?
It's so interesting. I listened to a great interview with the chief product officer of OpenAI the other day. And he was saying that sort of AI is the name that we give to things when computers start being able to do something that feels a bit like magic. And then once they've been able to do that for a few years, we rename it machine learning. And we've been doing this like cycle of the new thing is called AI, and then we rename it something else when we get used to the fact it exists. And so I think like at the moment when people say AI, they're talking about this new thing. Which like probably most people's first contact with was ChatGPT, with these sort of large language models that seem to be able to talk to you like a human. But I think the underlying sort of technical thing that is there is that the difference between what's probably called agentic AI versus traditional machine learning based AI. So traditional machine learning based AI is still important. It's been around for 20 years or so. And so if you have a revenue forecast, for example, something that goes out and forecast, you'll do this much revenue by hour over the course of the next 2 weeks. That's probably traditional machine learning. There are very few truly sort of agentic AI powered forecasts. So what characterizes machine learning is that it generally presents you with information that you can use to make a decision. You generally have to decide in advance what that information will be. And you can change a few parameters, like I want to view a different date range, or I want to view it for a different location. But it's broadly static information that's provided to you to make a decision. Agentic AI is this ability to give a system an objective. So to sort of collaborate with a system and say, I'm trying to achieve something. I'm trying to achieve a particular outcome, and then have it go out and work out for itself, what data might I need for that? Maybe go and do some exploratory data analysis. Then perhaps suggest some things that you can do off the back of that. Then potentially even watch for the outcomes of those and come back and monitor them and say, oh, actually, that didn't quite do what we expected. Maybe we should try this. And so that new thing that's just become possible, that's what sort of, I think, agentic AI is. And I think that's the thing that people are, or definitely, in my opinion, should be excited about, and has the ability to drive big changes in hospitality. Yeah.
So you can correct me, as if I understand it correctly, the current form of machine learning, as you call it, is more like an optimized search engine that can structure things for you very fast, where agentic AI is like having a second brain. It's like somebody that helps you ask these challenging questions you need. For example, how do I plan a marketing campaign in the most effective way? I'm this kind of restaurant, this kind of target group.
Exactly. I love the second brain analogy. I think it's a really good mental model for how it works, because it also brings in this idea that what AI does is augment people rather than replace people. There's I think a great example in hospitality is at any given time, there might be a problem, and that problem might get fixed by saying, well, we're going to build some dashboards that give us the information that relate to that problem. And then we're going to tell everybody they have to look at these dashboards every week. This is a real example from chatting to someone in a fast casual dining business recently. And one of the things that came out was that locations that scheduled more manager time over weekends were generally doing better. And then some locations that weren't. And so they sent a memo out to all their businesses saying, we're going to be looking at your rosters to see if how much manager time is being scheduled over weekends. And there's an improvement. And then that kind of gets better, and you see the revenue get better, and that's great. And then something else comes up, so the memo goes out about that, and another dashboard gets built for that. And humans just have a limited memory. Like, you can remember the last 5 of those things, but like even really, really dedicated people forget after sort of 5 or 10. So if you look at it 6 months later, the problem that you fixed has dropped off again. Because of course, no one's looking at 200 dashboards every single week. They're looking at the 5 most relevant ones. Whereas an AI agent, you can brief it on the fact that this is a variable that might matter. You can say, look, this is a thing that can have an impact on revenue. It is manager time. Actually, it can brief you that that's a thing, but that's a whole separate subject. And it will never forget that ever. And so while that variable is being well managed, it won't say anything. But as soon as it stops being well managed, as soon as it starts to become a problem, it can nudge a GM and say, hey, we've started to slip on the amount of GM time that's being scheduled at weekends. Do you want to have a look at that? If that doesn't get fixed, it can start to nudge an area manager and say, hey, a pattern that we saw before was that once this started happening, revenue started slipping. Do you want to just making sure this is on your radar? If revenue does start slipping, it can start escalating it further and say, hey, we really ought to be thinking about this. This problem that we had 6 months ago is starting to occur again. And it can do that with an infinite number of factors in a way that no human ever could. So it's not replacing a person. It just gives them this kind of infinite brain capacity.
Are we there now, or are we getting there from a technology point of view? Can we do that now? If I was an operator, I was thinking, can I really get technology that can do that now? Is it actually ready to do that, or does it still need some development before we're there?
It's really exciting, because I think if you look at, I don't know what everyone else's LinkedIn's look like, but if you look at my LinkedIn, you kind of get the impression that everyone has rolled out 100 AI agentic tools and they've automated their whole business. And I don't know, it all looks a bit intimidating, if I'm honest. And I think the reality is that it was only really around the end of 2024 that the models got good enough to make the really complex stuff possible. Some of it was early 2025. Yeah. So although there's most of the AI tool deployments people are talking about aren't this agentic AI thing. They're generally machine learning tools that have been rebranded as AI tools. And so there were almost no genuine agentic deployments at any frontline where not just hospitality, but sort of across hospitality, retail, care, healthcare. There's very little actually out there. The first real deployments will happen over the next sort of 6 or 12 months. There are some early case studies for some real early adopters. In e-commerce, you're seeing a little bit of stuff. In some retail support, you're seeing a little bit. But there isn't that much out there. So the good news is that everyone who's feeling left behind based on the LinkedIn stuff has not been left behind by any means. The other thing is that it really is possible now. Since sort of, and we're talking February, March this year, the models really are good enough that things like what I just described are completely possible to have in production. They're the sort of things that we've had from Sona, for example, has had in an R&D capacity since mid-2024. But the models just weren't good enough to actually put them into people's hands, really. And it was the end of 24 and the start of 25 where you start to try these things in real world scenarios, all the messiness and complexity that goes with actually running a complicated hospitality business. And the model has gotten good enough that they can do this stuff now. So yes, it is possible, but it only just became possible.
And that's really interesting, because I think you said really why, because I think a lot of leader thinks they're behind on this curve in a way. And why do you think, because let me phrase this question. Do you think there's a resistance to implement these kind of tools in hospitality? What has your experience been as your Sona has gone out and engaged with the market, or there's a big hunger to do it?
I think there's, particularly over the last 6 months, I think there's a lot of, it's moved towards there being a lot of hunger. I think sort of 12 months ago, there was some level of honestly quite fair skepticism, because I think hospitality has seen a few waves of tech where they didn't always see the benefits materialize. There was a lot of talk, and then in terms of benefit dropping to the bottom line, it didn't always happen. So I think there was some fairly justified skepticism a year or so ago. I think people are starting, or our experience is they're starting to see interesting things being done elsewhere, and starting to see that this is almost a bit inevitable now, that it's not 100% clear what the changes are going to be, but the changes are definitely going to exist, and that the businesses that adopt them early are going to have a huge advantage. And I think you've got these kind of, the push and pull factors that, the new tax year brought some fairly serious challenges with it. And so you've got a raft of push factors of just needing to do something differently. And then you've got the pull factor of starting to see, in some other industries, this making a real difference. And so I think the skepticism in lots of places is sort of being replaced with excitement. We're also seeing a surprising level of pull from workforces. There's been a really interesting dynamic that the kind of default question, and definitely 6 months ago, was the frontline would be resistant to this and they'd be worried about this. And we had one customer in particular that ran a big survey across their frontline workforce to try and gauge how concerned their workforce was about the use of AI. And what the survey showed was there were already about 20 different AI tools being used across the workforce. And the message from the frontline workforce was, our biggest concern is we don't know which of these tools we're allowed to use. We're already using them in our day-to-day life. Like, we're already using ChatGPT and everything else. Please, will you give us these tools, and please, will you tell us which ones we can and can't use, because we're not quite sure we're doing the right thing. And that won't be the case everywhere, but it was interesting that like the mindsets generally seem to be shifting towards this more quickly. ChatGPT has been the most downloaded app in the App Store for sort of a year or so now. So yeah, it's been it's an interesting dynamic shift, I think.
And that's really interesting when you say that. So actually the employers or the companies actually had that fear of the employees' perception of this. And actually what employees actually want, it's my experience, all the truth since before technology really thing, is make their job easier so they can actually, and not because it's not about laziness, it's actually about, I just want the resource and the power to do my job better. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's really what it comes down to. And actually, if you come in from a manager's point of view, I think we talked about that as we were having a pre-call. We talked a lot about this, how that can a manager actually enable himself to make better decisions. And I was talking about, the more clear thinking, because you have all this input that's coming both from your operation day to day, where the guest comes in, the employees moves back and forward, food is moving through the business, or if it's hotel, it's cleaning. And you're just like, your brain power is just slowly taken away. And actually, when you need to make important decisions, you may be tired, and therefore you don't look at the right data at the right time. So it's about that clear thinking and enabling thing. Have you seen that as well from the mid-management, like a pull for that as well, not just from the front line, but actually also from mid-management to actually become better at what they do?
Yeah, an analogy someone used for me the other day, which I really liked, was almost like a really, really good chief of staff. That it's like this person that sort of, they know what you care about. You can brief them on like, I care about all of these things, but it might be 50 things. And I've also got 100 other things to do at the same time. And then you can completely trust that that person will filter an awful lot of what's happening in the business, and they'll bring the things that matter to your attention. And I thought that was a really powerful analogy for like, it's sort of an extension on the second brain concept, that you can not relax exactly, but you can focus more on the things you're trying to do because you trust that the information that you need to get will get to you. Because I think lots of people, there's probably, I don't know if guilt's quite the right word, but I think everyone's had a feeling which is like, that there are 100 dashboards that you could look at. You also know that you're not looking at 100 dashboards, because who has time to go and flick through 100 dashboards every week to see what's happening? And you're pretty sure that no one else is looking at them either. No. But you sort of feel like you should. And you sort of know that everything would be a bit better if you did, but there's just no possible way of doing it. And it can just take away that sort of feeling, because you can trust that actually, I don't need to go and pore over sales data to try and understand whose drinks participation, dessert participation is best, because as new joiners get up to speed, a system will nudge you and say, hey, this person struggles a bit driving participation. Maybe they could do with some training. And so you can worry a little bit less about reading through those dashboards and think a little bit more about, how am I going to coach people to deliver a better experience and this sort of thing. And I think that freeing up of headspace and that freeing up of mind share is really important. I think that also, that's where when you free up people's headspace, that's when you give people the ability to be creative. I think, creativity thrives under a bit of pressure, but I think there is an upper limit on how much pressure people can be under before they stop being creative and they start focusing entirely on just how do I get the things I need to get done. And I think if you can free up operators to zoom out a little bit and think about, how can I, what things can I do differently to make this business meaningfully better? That's really powerful.
Yeah, and I guess also it's about not getting caught in getting caught in the operator's hamster wheel of putting out fire. Actually, which I think is the really interesting thing with AI as well, coming back to the second brain, as somebody to just say, hey, have you thought about, and you said, oh, actually haven't. Then you're reminded again, and actually suddenly at some point you step out because you want to leave the hamster wheel. Because most people know when they're in the hamster wheel, this is not going to solve my problem, but this is the most comfortable. But I don't know what question to ask myself to change direction. And then you're waiting for the operations director or the area manager to come by to ask you that question that could actually have been asked 2 months ago, in a way, because the operation director or area manager can only be in so many places a week as they can.
And you as a sort of an operator get to look like a superhero. You get to look like the person who, rather than having to be asked, is consistently showing sort of participation numbers that are getting better. You get to consistently be that person that, almost seems to have a crystal ball, because they work out that actually if we put a couple of extra people on Saturday, we can get 10% more out of dinner than we normally do. And that feels really good. Like, that's when people are also excited. That's when people love their work, because it allows you to do your absolute best work and to be seen as someone that's doing the absolute best work.
One of the things I've been thinking about, Ben, and it would be great to hear the experience you probably have from Sona or from what you've done before, is that, a lot of technology, any kind of project that has to hit the front line, about 70 to 80%, it's my experience, and also there's some studies on this, fail because, the change management of things. And now we have AI, it's a new tool. How do we actually, as operator, make sure that when we get all these great tools, which will land even better tools within the next 6 to 12 months, how do we actually make sure it gets out there to these frontline employees you were talking about before that really want some new tools, but actually then they start using them in the right way for the business? Because I guess every business is a bit different what they need to do with the tools they get access to.
Oh, completely. And again, you watch LinkedIn and there are 50 new tools for every single thing you can possibly do. I think it's the same in all businesses at the moment. It's like, well, for every single activity you undertake, there are now 10 different AI tools that could make it better along some axis. Yeah. And realistically, how many new systems can you give people a year? I mean, it's definitely not 50. I think it's, sort of, there's a zero, but there's an extra zero on there. So I think with all of it, it's what is it that actually matters? Across the business. I think it will vary. If you're a business that is, for some businesses it will be about cost. I think for a lot of business it will be about driving revenue. But having a really clear picture of what is the end goal that matters to us at the moment, and that's even before you get to AI. That's just as a business, what matters, and then what are the things that we perceive as mattering on the journey to getting there. And then being incredibly focused on what that means in terms of problems to solve, and then going out and actively finding vendors that are that are working on that specific problem, because the amount of inbound is only going to go up and up in terms of people coming and pitching that, we have the next AI. I've been pitched some amazing AI things recently. It is great, but it's oh, I didn't know I had that problem. And it's oh, because I actually don't have a problem. It's really cool, but it would be fun. My life wouldn't be meaningfully better as a result of it. And I think that focus is going to be incredibly important, of knowing, look, this is the thing that I have to make progress on over the next 12 to 18 months of business, and then going and seeking out AI-powered tools that actually address that problem. Otherwise, there's a definite risk of new shiny. And then as much as possible, bringing in the people that will actually be using it. Because I think AI tools work because you collaborate with them. And I think the word automation has been associated a lot with AI, and I think it's a really poor choice of word. AI automates far less than it collaborates. AI, it can be used to automate some things, and that's great, but it's the way that it augments human decision making that is really, really powerful. But it's going to be collaborating with people, and so this has always been true, but more than any other system, if you just buy an AI system and then just give it to those people, if they don't end up collaborating with it, if they don't know how, if they don't want to, there'll be no benefits from it at all. So I think it's incredibly important to get the down through the regional managers, the GMs, the people on the front line will be using and working shifts day to day, to have them involved in the process of choosing it and understanding what will it practically look like for them to collaborate to their system? Like, how is their day-to-day going to change as a result of this? And how do they feel about that? And the places where we're seeing the best sort of engagement are the people who really early on are involving those people in assessing the technology that's being considered.
Yeah, and I guess what you're saying is also deploying it by, test and learn phase first, where you involve some of the people that would be open to use it. They go and use it, they get some success, and that success is actually what's gonna sell the story across a bigger company out to the front line, where there might be some resistance as well and think, oh, just a new thing they're deploying again. That's really interesting. What has been, one of the things I was thinking about for this conversation, Will, is that if you look across these very heavy frontline, I know you do a lot of work in care as well. Who is actually getting this right when it comes to AI? Because you just said, like, you're going to be flooded with AI tool. And what is it that these company does exactly by, besides you said they need to know what they want to go and get solved, but how these companies operate that really are leveraging and enabling their organization with AI right now as it is doing right? What is the typical patterns, tenants, whatever we call them, you see there?
Yeah, I think one of the very low level things is the ones that we're really seeing accelerate now. And it's quite exciting watching them across both care and hospitality, not just with Sona software, with AI software in general. The people who have invested in getting their data in order have a huge benefit, have a huge advantage over everybody else, because all AI tools are only as good as the data that are there. They're able to reason about this data. They're able to deal with unstructured data in a way that other systems can't, but you still need to have data in some sort of cohesive form. And so based on what the sort of business objectives that you're solving are, if when you chat to a vendor and they say, oh yeah, we'd need access to whatever this information is, if that's something where you sort of say, oh, no problem, I would introduce you to this person, and I imagine that would be quite a simple conversation, then you're probably quite well set up. If your reaction to that is, oh, I don't even know where that data lives, like I don't know who has that, I think it might be another vendor that we can't access it. I think the people who are doing best are people who've thought about that problem very carefully. It doesn't need to be a hugely heavy initiative, but the people who've got some standardization of the way they're managing data, that might be a data warehouse, it might be having a third party manage some sort of data lake set up for them. But the businesses that have invested there in getting their sort of core business data into one place and dealing a little bit with the fragmentation of systems, they're definitely finding it easier to accelerate with those tools, because it's easier to try things if that's easily accessible, or if accessing that data isn't a giant project.
And that's quite interesting, because in a conversation I've had recently with a good friend of mine is that one of the we spent quite a long time, we've interviewed a lot of people on the show, we've done a lot of research into what we call maverick companies, and they have a tenant number one, which is actually to have clarity of purpose and direction. So that's your vision, mission, values, and strategy. There's absolutely clarity on that, and it's built on data, but also, what is the change we want to create in the world? And they are very good at communicating that through the organization. And a very good example, which I always talk about here on the show, the company I've seen that done the best in the world in hospitality is Singerman's in the US. They have this, everybody is living this vision. And I guess also one of the things you need to feed your AI machine with, whatever model you take into your business as important for you, is also your operating principle, or your governance, is called in a boring way, your culture and so on, because actually that's also important in decision making. The model knows that, because we did that as we were doing some things. Then we took the 7 tenants and uploaded into our chat CPT bot for the podcast. And it was quite interesting how it started to talk back to us. It talked like the Mavericks on the show and asking questions that way. I thought, that's quite crazy. We uploaded 2 white papers and then this, model around purpose and direction, the tenants. And you can already see it started actually to communicate in the same tone of voice and so on. I think if you have information like that, would that also inform better AI tools?
Yes. And there was some, particularly when you get to the exploratory things, it's fascinating how it can, I think of a good example, how when you give it, because you can give, once you have some standard level of data access, it will understand all the different data sources. And when you give it information and you give it sort of a very high level prompt, it can go and work out, oh, I'm going to go and do some different cuts of this data. And so, yeah, I think that everything from what do you value? Do you have any examples from the sort of the types of tenants and so on there, so I can make it a bit more specific?
Yeah, so what we did with ChatGPT, and this is like very low level, but I was like quite shocked about how good it was. Like we took a book of culture, so we have a Hospitality Maverick book of culture, and uploaded that. So that's a 3D version about, what is the value, what is the belief, and what is the behavior that needs to live the culture in a way. And then it goes through six values and behaviors and also beliefs. And that's a really soft kind of thing, but it's something you decided at some point that's an important operating principle for your business. And many businesses have a different format. They call it the Constitution. They call it the manifesto. Nike calls it the manifesto. But there's these basic business operating principles about how we work and operate and behave. And I think that's quite powerful, because then it becomes really a second brain, because then it becomes as close as a human you can become, because that's the human touch, I believe.
I completely agree. And I think it starts to also be able to flow all the way down into the system being able to explain why something's important. Because it's one thing to say, something I've seen a system do recently is flag that on the one hand, these two people, when they work together, are very effective. And so you should probably put them on when it's, for your peak periods on, in this case, it happened to be Friday and Saturday dinner with the two peaks. They should put it on there. And the step it took that I didn't necessarily expect it to take was it also flagged, though, that they've been working Friday and Saturday every week for quite a while. And that perhaps perhaps you ought to give them some time off, because do they want to work every single Friday and Saturday? That's a lot. And if you fed in corporate those sort of principles, it can start to give a why and say, it's not just because, selfishly we want to retain those people. It's also because as a business, we believe that family is important and we want to support people's overall sort of work life. And so you can say why. And I think humans respond to things much better if you can say, we think you should do this because this is important. And so you start to give it the ability to not only draw out, those little details like, hey, you should give this person, if this is your best performer, they probably need a day off, but you start to be able to tie it back to those sort of core principles. And I think so often those core principles get lost a bit. It's sort of they'll be on an office wall somewhere, but it's very hard to get people to say, and this is how every decision I'm making relates to those. And that I agree, that starts to be possible.
Yeah, that's become really interesting, because what I was like, my brain was just starting racing, because the most successful businesses I've been in myself, we can take McDonald's as an example, lives the culture into their systems. And actually with AI, you actually have a chance as a smaller business suddenly to make sure, does actually our original vision, mission, values, culture live, or the vision we have for business, does that actually extend into the way we operate? We can start measuring it. Suddenly you have a measuring point. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but you have something to measure on these very difficult things everybody talks about as important, but suddenly they can become visible, because technology is going to be your systems. It's not going to be your big fat operating manual you take down from the shelf. Everything's going to be online. So actually suddenly you have visibility as a leader, again, coming back to building systems and a business. And that's what it's all about. That's the value.
And that's been the dream, right, for a very long time. It's like, you know kind of what you want the operating system to be, but again, you can't put this, 8 different 3-ring binders in front of people every single day, because they don't. So how do you bring just a bit of that's relevant to the decision they're making? I agree. That's a very exciting direction for it.
Yeah, I know that was just us going a bit into the future, but I don't think we're far away. And that's what I've been dreaming about as an operator all the time, having that ability, because if I get the data set right, as you said, and I know my vision, mission, culture, and so on, then everything becomes everything, and then I can start measuring that in my day-to-day operation. Then suddenly I can move the business competitiveness much faster, because culture, often in hospitality, is the competitive edge that really gives you those extra 5%. So how do you start measuring that? So I know it's just, as you were talking, I thought this is really interesting to explore a bit more. Good. So then we were a bit in the future. where do you think we are right now? What should operator do as a very low? So you say, I've not deployed any AI tools into my business. What is like a low level action I can go and do to get my first experience of the magic? Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. So I think the magic bit's really important. Like, I think the whole thing is to digress slightly, powered engineering tooling has come along hugely in the last 6 months to the point that it can write code like a person does. And it's because we've been rolling these tools out within Sona because it means that one engineer can do 5 times as much as they used to be able to do, which is wild as a change. But it's incredibly difficult to have a conversation with somebody about these tools until they've had their wow moment of sitting down to do something that was meant to take a day and it taking 15 minutes. Because the mental model of what's possible, the thing that's now possible, is so fundamentally different that your base case will be to say, oh, this will never work. This can't possibly work because that would be magic and magic doesn't exist. And you see people go through this moment where they experience the oh, wow, this is real. This is a thing. And from that point forward, their entire mindset for how they interact with, in this case, these software tools, they almost don't want to stop using them. They don't want to use them for everything because they've had that experience of, oh, this is possible. But it's very difficult beforehand. So I think like before you even get to software to roll out, if people haven't played with things like ChatGPT, I don't think there's anyone there yet and push the limits of what it can do. A really fun experiment is to just give it some hypothetical parameters. Give one of the model, the chat things, just a hypothetical explanation of how your restaurant, hotel, whatever it is runs, and some constraints. And go and ask it to build a roster for you or come up with a plan for something and see how unreasonably well it does that thing without any clever software. That's just the bare model that you're talking to. And I think doing a few experiments like that for anyone that hasn't can help to switch people into that mindset of, oh no, this is possible. It can do things that a machine really shouldn't be able to do. Does that answer the question, or was that a little bit too?
Yeah, but I think that's really because planning is really key in delivering great hospitality. And I think if you can ask them parameters about, because the question you ask in a manager meeting around planning or scheduling, for that sake, can you make a marketing? Because that'd be one of the things I've done just to get idea. What is the right marketing mix for this situation? I want to achieve this, and you're surprised when it comes up with an initiative. I've done it on the podcast, and it's not perfect, but it's enough for me to get my brain wiring. Okay, these are the 3 things I'm going to focusing on. I'm going to try those things out, and then I'm going to come back and actually measure up against it. And actually, all the time you would have spent normally coming up with a marketing mix where I've done most of it. It's insane how much time you save, because it takes all the basic thinking out. What you need to find out is a unique touch in that marketing mix. Is that an event where this is happening? But it comes out with all these ideas. And I think that's really in the early planning phase where people sometimes procrastinate. It helps push you. Just the basic ChatGPT pushes you into action. Yeah. And action is all that matter in business. Yeah. So I agree with you. I really love that simple kind of way of doing it. And that's where I have learned using it. And now it becomes more and more sophisticated, more I feed the model. If it's Claude or ChatGPT, it becomes much more sophisticated every day. And then it becomes about 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, and then boom, 40% improvement in something. So I love that. Coming back a bit to you, Ben, because you're a business leader as well. You run a business, and what have been some of the significant learning? We can take an AI angle on it if you want to. You've had as a business leader the last 2 years, because there's so much change just in general in business and how business is done.
I think the biggest thing has been that if anything, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said that I tend to be over-optimistic about how quickly technology will develop. I've always been an optimist about technology. It's something I'm passionate about. I love trying new things. So I'm a long way across the early adopters curve, and that can skew my view of it. And AI is the first time where I found that I vastly underestimated how quickly the change would happen. I think AI tools in programming, as an example, they are now where 6 months ago I predicted they would be in 2-3 years' time. So they've, that's a 4x rate of change. And I think the rate of change is much higher than anything I've ever seen before. If you compare it to sort of the adoption of the iPhone, it was a relatively slow process, right? The people got iPhones and you had like the early adopters that had them, and then maybe people got them 6 months. It was a relatively slow process. And both the rate at which it's getting better and the rate at which people are adopting it has been much, much higher. And it's one of the first times as a startup we move very, very quickly. But I felt that even as a startup, we have to force ourselves to be more aggressive than we normally would be about adopting tooling, because I think you've got this situation where for the next 6, 12, 18 months, maybe, there'll be an early adopter benefit from being the people that realize that your business can be better with tools. And about 18 months from now, it's going to switch from being a benefit that you adopted to discovering that you were left behind, because you're now competing with a group of businesses that are productive at a level that is impossible without the tools. And I think that from talking to people in other startups, other industries, they're experiencing the same thing, that like sort of the rate of change that AI is driving is just much, much higher than anything we've seen before, which is really exciting. But it's also sort of, people sort of say it with 75% excitement and 25% fear, I think, because it also does mean that I think with some technological shifts, there's been a kind of wait and see option, which was like, oh, well, maybe we'll wait and see what everyone else does. And then once there'll be a clear winner, and then we'll follow and do that. And I think there's very much a feeling at the moment that option's not going to exist for these, because the people that do move first and the people that do adopt first, they're going to win so dramatically that by the time it becomes clear what the kind of winning technologies are and that sort of thing, anyone that was waiting won't be able to catch up. And that's that's uncomfortable. That's a difficult thing, because the wait and see approach in the past has been valid. And I think it's not going to work, not particularly in hospitality tech, just in any tech at the moment.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, because also I think you need to be in it you can't sit and wait is really interesting, because often many leaders, they sit and wait and get ready to jump on the train when it's time. They want to time it. But here you just need to go in it and actually just put your bets in on some things, because that's the only way you're actually going to be some way ahead of the curve, or
completely
be in the front runners. And you have to almost jump into the river and let it flow together with it. And I think that's scary, but also it's necessary. And it's like accepting uncertainty on a different level, that you are lots of things you're not in control of. But if you're not participating, you definitely don't have a chance to win it, because you're not going to learn anything learn or unlearn things in that period of time. You're just sitting and waiting. I think that's really, really, really good advice.
I sat on a panel about 15 years ago now with a big high street clothing retailers, brands that we all know. And one of the questions that they were asked was for each of they were CTOs of these clothing retailers, and they said, what's your tech strategy? And one of them said very, very completely candidly, we wait to see what they're doing, and pointed to a different brand on the stage. We wait 5 years to see if it delivers a return, and if it does, we roll it out. And that was they were and are a very successful retail brand. That is most definitely not how they're approaching AI, because they've sort of accepted that unfortunately that strategy can't work this time.
Yeah, and they could also put you out of a business when it comes to if you run frontline businesses, because the costs will only go one way, and the only way that's using technology as the innovation power. A totally different question than what we talk about, a non-tech question, but I think it's such a great question for guests here on the show. We were starting to ask that because we had a guest ask me this question. What is your favorite food moment, or hospitality moment, we can also say, through your life?
Oh, that's great. Actually, I think mine will be on a island, in terms of the definition of hospitality, and we're thinking, oh, that's what this word means. Being on an island in the Philippines, I think. Tiny island, only had electricity about 2 hours a day. And we asked if there's a restaurant, and they said, yeah, there's a restaurant down by the beach. You can go down to the beach. And so we went down and sat at this table, and someone came out and said, hey, what would you like to eat? And just listed some options, and we said this. And And they then went and cooked this food, and we thought, wow, that's a lot of food for two of us to sort of watch it. You could see them cook it. And they served us, and then they sat down and ate the same thing. And we all ate together, and it was their family was there as well. And that was, there were hardly any people on that island. And so it was sort of a hybrid between a sort of restaurant and just them cooking. And it was strange, but absolutely lovely. And in terms of just like pure hospitality and almost accidentally being taken into somebody's home as part of eating, it was absolutely lovely. So yeah, that was what sprang to mind.
Yeah, and also like it becomes about the human connection. That's what you're saying. And actually, suddenly the scene is set very differently than you thought, but actually you connected very much and you had a feel and an experience. I love that. That was a very good story. Last question before we stop today's conversation. What is the one question, Ben, you wished I asked you? And what would have been, and what would you have answered?
Probably the question I enjoy answering at the moment is like, what's the biggest change that's going to come from AI? Because I think that there's a thing, I spent my life building software, and I spent my entire life frustrated about the fact that for every piece of software I've built, there were 50 more pieces of software that I think the world would be better if existed. All these irritating tasks that people have to do, they don't need to do. They don't need to spend time doing those things because computer can do them, but no one has the time to build the software. I think the fundamental thing that's going to change is people imagine that because computers can now write software, we're going to need less software engineers. And it's the exact opposite. Because computers can now write software, we're going to have more software engineers. We're just going to build 1,000 times more software. And all of these things that up until now haven't been able to exist because it wasn't economically feasible to build a really great bit of software that solves that problem, and soon a really great bit of hardware that solves that problem. All of that stuff's going to become possible over the next 5 or 10 years, because all of these things that, would have taken a person 6 weeks are going to take a person 6 hours. I think that we're mainly talking about first order effects at the moment. We're talking about sort of how the software we're used to using gets better, but the result of that's going to be whole new categories of business and hardware and software and all sorts of things that no one's even imagined the categories exist, yet alone what they're going to be. And I think that's I think it's sort of that zoomed out picture of what AI does is, perhaps isn't talked about enough.
Yeah, and also that's where you start talking about where a human suddenly gets a totally different role in what their value add's gonna be. It's actually the quality of being a human, if you believe in the positivity of AI, actually becomes more important. So the human reflection and senses and what AI doesn't have. I know it can replicate very closely, but I still believe there's the human element of ethics and so on, where it becomes so important that you have that, and you actually lean in to be more human than a production machine from the industrial age, where it's about doing more, answering more email faster, building more tech faster. It's actually about having the headspace and the capacity to ask better questions.
I love that framing of it. It's literally that. I think humans get to lean in more and more to doing the things that make us human, because computers are going to go do more and more of the things that sort of sit outside of that. And I think that's a really sort of exciting future that we'll get to live in.
If people want to ask you more questions or excited about anything, where should they go to connect with you and Sona, for that sake?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm on Twitter. I'm Talking Quickly, which is a handle that I have across most of the internet. Hopefully, I didn't talk too fast for most of this, but it comes from my tendency to talk far too fast about topics that I'm excited about. I'm also Ben at getsona.com, and always happy to chat to people, particularly about AI. I think there are plenty of people out there who will vouch for the fact that I genuinely just enjoy having interesting conversations about AI far more than I think about selling anything to do with Sona. So if there are people who sort of have questions about AI, whether it's sort of through what Sona does in workforce management or just more widely what's happening in the industry, I'm always keen to get sort of coffee or virtual coffee so please get in touch.
Great, Ben. Thank you so much coming on the show, sharing your understanding on view on where AI is compared to the bigger picture, but also especially hospitality, and how it can enable us to actually become better businesses and operate it. I'll send you and the team at Sona Power and Energy for the months ahead. There's lots of exciting things coming, I can hear.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on here. It's been, really enjoyed the conversation, and hope it's interesting or useful to some people.